Good morning. Title of the lesson this morning, it was not one I made up, but I find it intriguing. I had to think about it myself. It's, what are you going to be when you grow up? And then the days before Jesus' arrival. That part I understand. It's the first part that was interesting. We'll talk about that as we go through. We're going to begin in the book of Mark chapter 10. There is a parallel, but we're going to preeminently stay right here for this, at least for this first one. Mark chapter 10, verse 32. Now, as they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, Jesus was going before them, and they were amazed, and as they followed, they were afraid. Then he took the 12 aside and began to tell them the things that would happen to him. As you read this text, the first thing that pops into your mind is a little bit of surprise, or at least is on my part. Jesus is in the front and everybody else is following behind. What's going on here? You know, if you think about the rest of his work on earth up until this point in time, it seems like they stay right with him. But this time they're drifting back for some reason. And Jesus at this juncture, notice, is going to Jerusalem. He's got his face set. He knows where he's headed. And that may be part of the problem. If you recall, when we were looking at the incident leading up to the resurrection of Lazarus, that the disciples were a little bit afraid of going into Judea because they said, basically, the last time you were there, it didn't go real well. Well, it went even less well, if you would, when he raised Lazarus from the dead, because they, at that moment, the Jewish leaders, after the resurrection of Lazarus, set their sights on, we're going to kill Jesus. We're going to take him out. He's causing us troubles. And so it may not be totally surprising to see Jesus, out front and everybody else trailing a little bit along behind. That's what seems to be going on here. So verse 33, behold, we're going up to Jerusalem. The Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and to the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him to the Gentiles. And they will mock him and scourge him and spit on him and kill him. And the third day, he will rise again. When McGarvey looked at this, he found 7 specific prophecies that Jesus makes about what's going to happen when he finally is betrayed. Notice what they are. He'll be delivered up. That is the betrayal. That's Judas betraying him. Then we've got the condemnation, which begins, of course, with the Jewish leaders. And then we have delivery to the Gentile. Why? Because the Jews couldn't kill him. They didn't have authority to. The only ones that had authority to were the Romans or their representatives. And so they deliver him up to the Gentiles. Then we've got mocking and the manner of it that he describes here. And then the scourging. And then death by crucifixion. And then finally, the resurrection on the third day. So all of that is in this short, very quick prophecy. Now, this is not the first time that Jesus has foretold these coming events. In fact, we've got 2 other occasions. One is in Matthew 16. That's, of course, when right after Peter had said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And then the second one is in Luke chapter 9. But this one is the most specific of all the prophecies. This is a much more detailed prophecy, and it leaves no doubt about what's coming. He is about to be thoroughly betrayed. Now, for us, because we know the rest of the story, I guess you'd say, this is not shocking. But I want you to think about what it would have been like to be one of the disciples, to have lived your entire life being told and thinking that the Messiah was going to establish an earthly kingdom and that he was going to deliver the Jews from the hands of all their oppressors. Now, for them to hear him say, I am going to be delivered up, I am going to be put to death, and then raised from the dead, I doubt they even heard the last part. Because the first part was so shocking that they probably couldn't hear, if you would, beyond what he had said. That's a little bit, I think, in the background of what's going on here. Well, oddly enough, it's at that point in time that we come to an incident involving James and John. Now, if you read the parallel accounts of this, you're going to get the distinct impression that their mother asked. And that may well be the case. Mark says they asked because if you read everything that's said, Jesus knows exactly who's asking. In the other account, when the mother asks, he says, he asks what you want, or you don't know what you want, and it's not singular, it's plural. So he knows who's asking the question. It kind of reminds you of the young child that comes to you and asks for something, and you got a pretty good idea that they didn't think this up on their own. The older child or older children put them up to it, to get them to do it. Jesus is aware of that. But in Mark's account, here's how it's reported, beginning verse 35. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him, saying, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. And he said to them, What do you want me to do for you? They said to him, Grant us that we may sit, one on your right hand and the other on your left, in your glory. Now, a few things that we could observe here. First of all, I think it's McGarvey. I've got the note for you in the material I gave you. He says it's obvious they were ashamed of what they were asking for. Why? Because they don't tell him at first. They say, we want you to give us whatever we ask you. Now, why would they think they could do that? And I don't know the entire answer to that. Maybe I don't know any of the answer to that, but I've got some suspicions. And others have written about it as well. That is, first of all, it appears Jesus was a cousin to these fellows. Their mothers appear to have been sisters. Now, you're going to do some tracking on the women that are at the cross and so forth, but you'll come up with that if you search those verses out. So they may have thought, well, of everybody that's in your group, we're the ones closest to you. So, if you're going to be a king, we need to be right there with you. Right hand, left hand, that kind of thing, as they think about it. Furthermore, you'll remember these two are in what might be called the inner circle. When Jesus goes on the Mount of Transfiguration, who goes with him? Peter, James, John. When Jesus goes in to raise Jairus' daughter from the dead, who goes in with him? Peter, James, John. These two are in, as I say, usually the inner circle. In fact, even later when we get to the Garden of Gethsemane, guess what? All of them will go into the garden, but then Peter, James, and John will go deeper with him into the garden. So, maybe these things combined make them believe that they can make a special request. Jesus is as smart as your average, or maybe above average, but certainly average mother. That is, he won't answer the question until he finds out what they want. I don't know about you, but I've learned as I've gotten older, somebody will say, I need a favor. I'll say, what is it? It's not that I'm unwilling to do things for you. I am. but what's your favor? It might be that I can't do whatever it is you want me to do. Jesus is not going to answer this question, and yet he already knows the answer. He's forcing them to ask the question. He's drawing them out into the open so that they're going to tell exactly what it is that they're looking for. And I think that's very, very important, because what they're looking for basically is to be in the inner circle in the kingdom. They want to be in the inner circle of the King. They've already been his inner circle during this earthly walk. But they want to be there when he rules. They want to be right by his side in positions of power. Sounds a little bit like our age, doesn't it? Aren't there people that are looking for power, it seems like? Well, these fellows, unfortunately, are in that same category. So pick up now verse 38. But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" Now, obviously, cup and baptism are figurative. They're figures of speech in this particular case. The word cup among the Hebrews is the assigned portion. This is what's been given to you. Think about the child that's going through the line, maybe, or going to making an order at the restaurant, and the server, they don't call them waitresses or waiters anymore. The server says, "Okay, so what do you want?" And the child would like to speak up, but the mama or daddy says, "Well, they want the chicken nuggets and they want milk." See, very specific. This is your portion. This is what you get. They might have ordered anything, no telling, but this is their assigned portion. Well, cup, we understand then. And then what about baptism? The word baptizo means to dip, to plunge, to immerse. So in this case, he's talking about the immersion that he is about to experience in pain and suffering. That's what he's talking about. So what's his portion? Is to die. He just told them that. They just haven't quite, put that all together. And what about his baptism? Well, that's the suffering that's going to go along with it. And he says, you don't know what you're asking for. You do not have a clue what you're asking for. But then he goes on and says, "But to sit on my right hand and on my left is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it is prepared." Now, in my notes, there's a mistake. It was not in Jesus' power to, it's not grand, try grant. Put a T there instead of a D. I will talk to my typist tomorrow and see if I can get all that straightened out. But at any rate, grant. It's not in his position to grant that, the request that they are making. Now that leads us to a question. If it's not in his power, whose power is it in? Well, there could be several different answers. One, it could be this has already been decided. If you think about what you see in Peter's comments in the great Pentecost sermon, he talks about Jesus being on the right hand of power. You got the same thing or similar to that in the book of Hebrews. And so who's going to sit on the left hand of Jesus? Looks like the Father is who's going to be there. Who's going to be on the right? Well, I don't know. I don't have a biblical answer to that question. But it may already be predetermined, or it may be left up to the Father to decide that. There are things Jesus doesn't decide. He yields to the will of the Father over and over again in his earthly ministry, and so it may be that's what he's referring to. But suffice it to say, he can't give this to Peter and, to James and John. Now, here is the odd thing. Listen to what he goes on to say, what he went on to say. He says, or earlier in verse 39, you will indeed drink the cup that I drink, and with the baptism I'm baptized with, you'll be baptized. So, think about it. Who is the first apostolic martyr? Not the first Christian martyr. That'd be obviously Stephen in Acts chapter 7. Who's the first apostle to be put to death? James. James is. That's in Acts chapter 12, that Herod puts him to death with the sword, and he gets such a good reaction to that he arrests Peter, and he's going to kill him too. That's his plan. It doesn't work out that way, as you probably remember, but that's the plan. What about John? Well, John, maybe more than James, really partakes of the baptism of suffering. If you read, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, you're going to get a sense of the suffering that he's going through and the pain because of what he sees. And then you get to the book of Revelation, and there he is as an old man being exiled to the Isle of Patmos. And you have a sense, I think, as you read Revelation, of the loneliness that he experienced. He is isolated. Remember now, as we started this, where's Jesus? He's out front and everybody else is trailing. Now think about John, and is he going to end up basically in the same position? It looks that way to me. So will they partake of what he partook of? The answer is a solid yes. In what way? Well, my answer would be probably in what we've just been talking about, the things that will happen to them. All right, pick up again at verse 41. And when the 10 heard it, they began to be greatly displeased with James and John. Why? Why are the 10 upset with James and John? Because that's what they wanted. You ever seen 3 kids get in the car and the first one holler out, "Shotgun"? They're going to be riding, in the front seat, with mom and dad or grandma, grandpa, whoever it is. You ever seen that? What about the other kids? I wanted that. You can already hear them talking about, I wanted that. That was what I was going to do. Here they come. Well, here come the 10. And why are they upset? Because that's what they want. They weren't quick enough on the draw to ask for it. To be the first to ask for it. Maybe I should say it that way. So we go ahead, verse 42. And Jesus called them to himself and said to them, "You know that those who are considered rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them." All right. How was it in the worldly kingdoms of Jesus' day? If you were in power, you lorded it over people. In other words, they'd say, "You do this." And if somebody questions, say, "Look, I'm in charge, do this." That was the attitude of the political leaders of that day. Sometimes I get a sense of that same attitude even now, but we'll not go there for the moment. But listen as he goes ahead. "Yet it shall not be so among you, but whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant. And whoever of you desires to be first shall be slave of all." The nature of the kingdom of God under the rule of King Jesus is that if you want to rise to the top, you stoop in service. He illustrates that later in John chapter 13 as he washes the feet of the apostles, and he says to them, "You need to do what I've just done. Imitate me. Take care of the needs of other people." Is the idea. Now look at the last 45th verse. "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." It really is sad and there's a little bit of a tone of chastisement that comes from what Jesus says. He's been showing them for 3 years what it means to be great in the kingdom. It always means service, always, over and over and over again. So there's a little bit of chastisement, it seems to me, as he answers them in this case. He's a living example of what they ought to be, and yet they were not. All right. So then we go straight from that to the discussion of blind Bartimaeus. Now they came to Jericho. As he went out of Jericho with his disciples and a great multitude, blind Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, sat by the road begging. Okay. If you read every account of this incident, you've got one saying that's here. Notice the way he says it. As he went out of Jericho, you're going to read another one, I think it's Luke, that says, as he went into Jericho. And you say, whoa, wait a minute, that's a contradiction. No, not if you understand the geography of the situation. We have Jericho, we have ancient Jericho, now obviously destroyed when they came across the Jordan. We remember that. But then also remember that Joshua made a prophecy that the fellow that rebuilt Jericho would lay the foundation with the death of his one son, and would have a second son die when he set the gates. Remember that? So this is still a pretty old city. But what happened was when Herod came along, Herod built a second Jericho. And they're separated by a little bit of distance. So you literally could leave Jericho and then go into Jericho. You got to see it, though, as a geographical statement that an inspired man would understand that because he lived in that era. He lived and that was the case. To us, it looks like a contradiction, but it is not. And I've got that. Wayne Jackson gives pretty good details about that building and so forth that was done so that there were two Jerichos. So we got, by the way, we have two blind men. If you read, again, the parallel accounts, there are two blind men. But Mark only mentions one. Why only one? Well, I'm going to guess a little bit. He's the more prominent one. Now, I don't mean prominent as in he's higher standing socially. I just mean maybe he speaks up more. You know, if I were naming, and you see that over and over again, do you think every time Peter spoke up, he's the only one that spoke? Or was he just the loudest one? Or the one that led the chorus, so to speak? My suspicion is sometimes he just led the chorus. You know, that he was the first, but others would follow. So maybe that's the situation. I really don't know. But he goes on. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Now, by the way, if he calls him Son of David, what does that make him? That means blind Bartimaeus recognizes him as Messiah. He sees him as a descendant of David. He sees him as the coming king. Then many warned him to be quiet. And he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. So Jesus stood still and commanded him to be called. Then they called the blind man, saying to him, be of good cheer, rise, he is calling you. And throwing aside his garment, he rose and came to Jesus. So this is what begins to transpire here with all of this. Blind Bartimaeus is going to be healed. Now, I'm going to go ahead and finish Mark, and then we're going to turn over to Luke and pick up what he says about it. So Jesus answered and said to him, what do you want me to do for you? The blind man said to him, Rabboni, that I may receive my sight. Now, Rabboni is either great one or master or teacher. You can fill in any one of those, and all of them are a statement of honor. Then Jesus said to him, "Go your way, your faith has made you well." And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus on the road. Now, let's look to Luke so that we can see the parallel account. Luke chapter 18. We're going to stay in Luke pretty much the rest of the way this morning. So Luke tells this story beginning in verse 35 of Luke 18. Then it happened as he was coming near Jericho. See that? Mark said what? He was leaving Jericho. Luke says he's coming near. Well, sounds like he's in between. He's in between the old city and the new city. It's what it looks like. That a certain blind man sat by the road begging, and hearing a multitude passing by, he asked what it meant. So they told him that Jesus of Nazareth was passing by. And he cried out, saying, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Then those who went before warned him that he should be quiet, but he cried out all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." So Jesus stood still and commanded him to be brought to him. And when he had come near, he asked him, saying, "What do you want me to do for you?" And he said, "Lord, that I may receive my sight." Then Jesus said to him, "Receive your sight, your faith has made you well." And immediately he received his sight and followed him, glorifying God. And all the people, when they saw it, gave praise to God. Okay, his request is fulfilled, and Jesus credits it this time to his faith. Now here's my question. Is anybody in Scripture ever healed without having faith? And the answer is yes. Yes, they are. Do you remember the fella, for example, who was paralytic, and he was carried by 4 of his friends, and they took him when they couldn't get in the house because it was too crowded. They took him up on top of the house, and they began to pull the roof away, and they let him down through the roof. Whose faith did Jesus command on that day? The 4 men. Not the paralytic. We don't know anything about the faith of the paralytic. Let me give you another one. What about the lame man at the Temple Gate Beautiful? That's in Acts chapter 3. Does he have faith? He doesn't demonstrate any faith. What does he do? He does to Peter and John what he does to everybody. Would you give me some money? Would you give me some alms? Would you help me? Is what he's asking for. And you can almost see the disappointment on his face when Peter says, "Silver and gold we don't have." You can almost see his face drop. But then when he said, "But what we do have, we give you." And then in the name of Jesus, what do? They cause him to rise up and walk. So it is not necessary for an individual to have faith for a miracle to be worked in the New Testament. Now today the miracles are done. I'll give you a couple more examples you probably haven't thought of at all, but you got Jairus' daughter. She was dead. No evidence of faith there. Faith on the part of her dad, yes, but not faith on her part. The widow of Nain's son, we don't know anybody had faith there except Jesus. He did. But there's no faith. So please be careful, because there are people today walking the earth who are going to try to trap you into confessing or admitting that even Jesus couldn't heal you if you had no faith. That's not true. That's false. And if you concede that position, then I can promise you the debate is over before it started, because you've already conceded the one thing they're going to use against you. Okay, so I wanted to bring that out. By the way, you're going to spot other little problems with my typing, so I'll just give you notice of that before as you go along, because I picked them up. I've marked them to fix them later. When I get back to the office tomorrow, Lord willing. Okay, so now we go to the story of Zacchaeus, probably the more famous of the stories that we've been talking about. There is a lot here, more than maybe I had at least thought about as I read these stories. So here we go. Then Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. Now remember, Luke had him previously going in, and now he's got him entering and passing on through. So it appears, if I follow the text correctly, putting Mark and Luke together, that Jesus has already gone through the old city, probably, and he has entered, and Luke has him entering and passing through. The healing of blind Bartimaeus was in between, and now he goes through Jericho, and it's then that an interesting incident takes place. Now, I did notice here, Wayne Jackson gives you a geographical description. It's located in the Jordan Valley, which means it's about 1,000 feet below sea level, roughly. About 8 miles northwest of where the Jordan enters the Dead Sea, and 17 miles from Jerusalem. So that gives you some orientation. If you're going to go from Jericho to Jerusalem, which way are you going? Up. That's an easy answer, because Jerusalem is about 2,600 feet above sea level. Jericho is somewhere between 900 and 1,000 feet below sea level. So you've got a 3,500 foot or so climb that you've got to go through to go there. Now behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus who was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. Now, why this place? Here's the comment that was made by Wayne Jackson. 2 trade routes converged at Jericho, and Herod had a palace there, thus making it an ideal place for collecting taxes. Lots of folks are going to go by there. And so it's easy to pick up tax money there. So here's Zacchaeus. He's working in a very fortuitous place. If you're talking about becoming rich, working for the Romans, and that's what a tax collector would have done in that day. McGarvey makes another note to go along with this that Jericho is in the area, in the valley where the balm of Gilead came from. You ever heard that song? There is a balm in Gilead. So that's coming from this Jericho area in the valley that is around it. Okay, so what happens? And he sought to see Jesus, who Jesus was, but he could not because of the crowd, for he was of short stature. So he ran ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was going to pass that way. Sycamore tree, not the sycamore that we think about. This sycamore tree is in that area, in that day, was a species of wild fig. It grew between 30 and 40 feet high, and it was a pretty gnarly type of thing. Now, any little boy that has ever done any climbing of trees knows the easiest tree to climb is one with lots of gnarls, things you can put your feet on to get boosted up, in other words. So little Zacchaeus is not tall enough to see Jesus over the crowd, but he is apparently a good climber, because he goes straight into that tree and straight up, so that he can see Jesus as he comes by. So verse 5. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him and said to him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must stay at your house. Several things to observe, and I think Jackson is the first to note that I want to notice. He says, notice, he spoke to Zacchaeus, knowing his name, but he's never been introduced. That reminds us he's the Lord. But it gives me something else. We need to realize that even people who may not be loved by society, who may be an outcast in society, still need the gospel. Zacchaeus is an outcast. He is not loved by society, not in that era. He's a tax collector. And the tax collectors worked for Rome, and the tax collectors took money from them. They didn't appreciate them at all. And you can hear that because the Pharisees would talk about tax collectors and sinners, publicans and sinners. So they don't like them at all. But Jesus calls him by name. Secondly, he was kind to him. How? He offered association. I'm going to go to your house. Here is an outcast, and you're going to go, what? You're going to his house. That's, again, indicates the way that Jesus is showing this man a favor, as it were. And then he did exert some authority, told him what he was going to do. I'm coming to your house today. See, no questions or issues that are involved there. Now, by the way, when McGarvey looks at that, he zeroes in on the word must. For today, I must stay at your house. That's an interesting way to put it. You may remember when you look at John chapter 4, and Jesus is passing along. It says he must go. He needed to go through Samaria. Why? Nobody else did. Okay, he must go to Zacchaeus. Was there nobody else's house he could go to? Well, of course there was. There were other houses he'd go to, but he needed to go. He must go to Zacchaeus' house. And then one more thing observed by Jackson as he went through this series of things that he saw, he stressed the urgency of this because he said, make haste. Hurry up and come down. I'm going to your house. So all of that is included in what he says, along with, as I said, the I must, which McGarvey notes. Now pick up at verse 6. So he made haste and came down. By the way, did he listen to the Lord? Did he do exactly what the Lord said? Yes, that's pretty easy. The Lord said, make haste and come down, and Zacchaeus made haste and came down, did just what he said. So he made haste and came down, received him joyfully. But when they saw it, they all complained, saying, he's gone to be a guest with a man who's a sinner. They don't call him just a tax collector, he's a sinner. Interesting take on that. Then Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, look, Lord, I give half of all my goods to the poor. And if I've taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I restore fourfold. Okay, McGarvey makes these comments. First of all, there was a negative murmuring among the crowd. And Zacchaeus stood to give emphasis and publicity to his words. The law of restoration in cases of theft or fraud are found in, and he gives you Exodus 22, Numbers 5. The proposition of Zacchaeus to restore fourfold suggests the bulk of his wealth had not been gained in dishonest ways, for if so, he would not have been able to make such restitution. In other words, if he had $100 and all 100 was taken from other people, how would he ever pay back fourfold? He doesn't have the money. So I think the indication in the text is Zacchaeus, despite the fact that he's a tax collector, is pretty honest. Is he willing to follow the law? Yes. He's going to follow the law. By the way, David uses the same law when Nathan the prophet comes to him. I think that's in 2 Samuel chapter 12, where you may remember that Nathan the prophet says, basically there was a rich man who took the one sheep of a poor man. What did David say? He's going to give back fourfold. Well, That's the law. He'd really like to kill him, what he said, but to keep the law fourfold. So here's Zacchaeus saying, I keep the law, I'm going to keep the law. And not just the law in reference to anything he took by theft, which apparently, as we've said, probably is not much, if any. But in addition to that, he's going to give to the poor. He's going to take care of the needy. And again, law of Moses is just rich with that. Just overflows with the idea of taking care of the needy. So, pick up from there with what he said and begin. Notice verse 9. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house because he also is a son of Abraham. Tony Ash, in his commentary, noted this. The word today confirms the conclusion that Zacchaeus' financial resolutions had just been made. Today, salvation come to this house. This may not have always been Zacchaeus' practice, but it's going to be now. This day, he'd made that particular move. So McGarvey says Zacchaeus was converted. He's changed. He's changed by Jesus coming to his house. So then verse 10, for the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. And Zacchaeus is just one example of that. Okay, now there's one more parable we want to pick up on. Begins in verse 11 of that 19th chapter. Now as they heard these things, he spoke another parable because he was near Jerusalem, and because they thought the kingdom of God would appear immediately. Therefore he said, a certain nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return. Who's he talking about? He's talking about himself. He's going into a far country. He's going to die. He's going to the Hadean realm. And what's he going to get when he comes back? He's going to have a kingdom. He's going to be king when he comes back. Isn't that exactly what is laid out by Peter on the day of Pentecost? So continue. So he called 10 of his servants, delivered to them 10 minas, and said to them, do business till I come. Now, a mina, I put a note here so that we would know. It's about 3 months' wages, approximately, somewhere in that neighborhood that we're talking about. And they're given an assignment to take care of this money of their masters. And of course, the hope is that they'll get more in his service. So verse 14. But his citizens hated him, sent a delegation after him, saying, we will not have this man to reign over us. Who are the citizens? I'd say it's the Jews, the Jewish leaders. They don't want Jesus to be king. That's evident from everything that we've already seen, and it's clear even here. So continue. And so it was that when he returned, having received the kingdom, he then commanded these servants, to whom he had given the money, to be called to him, that he might know how much every man had gained by trading. Then came the first, saying, Master, your mina has earned 10 minas. And he said to him, well done, good servant, because you were faithful in very little, have authority over 10 cities. The second came, saying, Master, your mina has earned 5 minas. Likewise, he said to him, you also be over 5 cities. Then another came, saying, Master, here's your mina, which I have kept put away in a handkerchief. For I feared you, because you're an austere man. You collect what you did not deposit and reap what you did not sow. And he said to him, out of your own mouth I will judge you, you wicked servant. You knew that I was an austere man, collecting what I did not deposit and reaping what I did not sow. Then why did you not put my money in the bank, that at my coming I might have collected it with interest? By the way, that word bank could be translated table. And you might say, well, why table? Do you remember Jesus going into the temple twice and overturning the money changers' tables? They did their banking at the table. That's why he talks about a table, although this translation has bank, but it'd be perfectly acceptable to put table there if you understand what it's talking about. And he said to those who stood by, "Take the mina from him and give it to him who has 10 minas." But they said to him, "Master, he has 10 minas. For I say to you that everyone who has will be given, and from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. But bring here those enemies of mine who did not want me to reign over them, and slay them before me." The Jews are going to be defeated. They're going to be defeated by the real king, the one they rejected. He's going to be the one. So a beautiful parable that includes two aspects. One, you and I need to work with what he gives us. And he expects to get a return of some sort. Expects us to be good servants of his. And then, number two, if you reject him, you're going to pay for it. The Jews did. All right. Next week, we'll pick up from roughly there.